All right, welcome to Chukwu's channel. I'm Ifai Chukwu. Walk with me today. Like and follow. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to talk about a topic that's important to me. It's the need for every man to have a code. I'm going to tell you what I mean by a code, why I think you need one, how to create it, how to use it. Let's get started. What do I mean by a code? It's just like a code of conduct at a company, right? You go get a job at XYZ company, they have a code of conduct, how you have to treat your fellow coworkers, what you can and cannot do with company property, etc. Think of your own personal code as a set of rules, principles that you'd like to live by, right? They help determine everything from your career, what type of person you pick as your life partner, your politics, how you treat people, how you deal with conflict, everything. It's very important to have a code. The type of people you associate with, all right? Talks about that as well. Now, why should you have one? In my opinion, it's like your own life map, right? It helps you achieve your purpose to start, assuming you figured out your purpose, and creating a code, if you haven't figured out your life purpose, can help you actually do that, right? It helps you define what you stand for, what you stand against. Also, you can refer to it if you have a code to help you when you have an important decision, right? Maybe there's an important decision about work in your career, whether you want to take a promotion, whether you want to switch departments, right? A business idea your cousin has came to you and asked you to invest in. That can be a tricky situation. Having a code can help with that. How to raise your kids, all kinds of situations. It's important to have a code as the framework, as the guide that you use to make some of these decisions, okay? That's why. Now, when should you actually start to create your own code? And we'll talk about how you actually do that in a second, but when should you actually start creating it? My opinion, you should start writing it down somewhere in your early 20s, mid 20s. Before that, any younger than your 20s, you're 16, 17, you're still learning who you are, right? At that point in time, you haven't really had enough life experience to even begin to craft your own code, right? You don't know that much about life. You haven't been anywhere. You haven't had any failures. You haven't had as many successes. So don't start too early. If you're one of my younger viewers, maybe you can start thinking about it, but I'd say you have to at least be in your 20s to start crafting your own personal code, 20s or later, right? And it's never too late to get started. If you're 45 watching this, you can still have your own personal code of conduct. You got a lot of time left, right? So start somewhere in your late 20s, in my opinion. Now, how do you actually create the code? This is the meat of the matter. How do you do it? Where do you start? There's no way to start. There's no one way to start, right? You can do a few things. I'm going to give you some ideas. Start by asking yourself, how would you like to be remembered, right? In other words, someone asked one of your friends, what was John like, or what is John like? What do you want that person to say about you, right? Do they want to say you were an asshole? Do they want to say that you were hardworking and reliable, you were trustworthy, you were courageous? What do you want people to say about you? That's one way to just think about it. I'm just giving you a few ideas, right? Another way is by asking yourself a simple question, but one that's very hard to answer, and that is, who are you? Who am I, right? Starting by writing down answers to that question. Don't be surprised actually if it's very difficult to answer that question. Many people, I think, have never thought about who they really are. So trying to put pen to paper and write down who you are, you might find it to be difficult for some. Okay, so don't worry about that. Just start. You can also just start with the things that are important to you, things that you feel passionately about. Okay, use that as your guiding light, your lighthouse. It could be life experiences, things that you take from your own personal religion, things that you take from family members that you respect or family members that you admire, etc. Okay, so that gives you some ideas about how to actually create it. Now, tactically, what do you want to do? Step one, write it down, which might sound simple, but it's true. You need to write it down. Writing things down make them real, right? It allows you to organize your thoughts. It allows you to really put things into context. If you're like me, you have a lot of thoughts swirling around in your head, a lot of ideas. When you sit down and put pen to paper, it helps them become more solid, right? So that's how you tactically start. Write it down. How long should it be? This is something simple. We're not talking about writing a novel. It shouldn't have more than 10, 15 at the most principles or rules, right? Otherwise, it starts to add a bunch of stuff that may not be super important. It also gets harder to remember, quite honestly, right? Think about quality over quantity when you're writing your code. It doesn't have to be super long. 10 to 15 items, right? Maybe even less. Now, we talked about what a code is, why you want to create one, how do you tactically go about it, right? Now, let's talk about how do you put your code into practice? How do you use it? How I use my own code, once I had it written down, every day, every morning, actually, I wake up and I read it, right? These are my principles. It helps reset things, sets the trend for the day. At the end of the day, how I use mine, I read it again. And then I ask myself, have you lived by these principles today? Or more importantly, did you break any of these rules? Did you violate any of these principles? If you have not lived by it, you broke some rules, it's not a problem. Ask yourself how you can do better tomorrow. Might even want to write down the answer to those questions as well. Okay? Now, a few things to note. Your code is never going to be the same as anyone else's. But to give you some ideas about the things that it should include, I will be honest and respectful in my dealings with people. I will face my fears each day to learn more about myself. I'll wash my ass every day. It could be anything, right? Things that are important. I'll always seek to learn more about the world. That's very important in my opinion. Also, it's important that your code stands the test of time. What do I mean by that? You shouldn't be completely redoing your code or even making major changes to it every month or so. It needs to stand the test of time. The principles that define a person, things that people respect in others, they don't change that much over time, so your own code shouldn't. Things like honor, integrity, wisdom. Look back in history. The same traits that were respected hundreds of years ago are the same traits that are respected today. So if you take your code, take your time, and you create your code intelligently, you shouldn't be changing that often, right? Now, I've told you what a code is, why you should have one, and how to make one. Give it a shot. Start slow. Let me know in the comments how it goes. Thanks for checking out my channel and tune back in. I'm out.